Okay, hi guys. Welcome to another edition of our Founders Desk series from Africa Bitcoin News. My name is Megas Lee, and today we have an amazing guest, one of the top founders in Africa that has been doing something really, really amazing and inspiring with us. And he is going to share his story with us. I hope you have a great time. So please, without further ado, I think I'd love to introduce Hermann Vivier, who is currently the founder of Bitcoin Ekasi and doing some amazing stuffs in the country of South Africa, precisely in Mossel Bay, Bitcoin Ekasi in Mossel Bay. I think I'm going to speak from the angle of somebody who has actually been in Mossel Bay. I remember when I came to Mossel Bay in 2025, when we visited Bitcoin Ekasi, I had always been seeing all the news, seeing everything on Twitter, but it was really, really inspiring to come see the things for myself, see the suffer kids, see the whole, circular economy going, and we could actually pay for things in Bitcoin. So I think I'd really love to hear the background of the story. I'm curious, how did it all started to the point where it got to where it is today?
I mean, I'll make a long story short by saying that it's based on a small community project called the Surfer Kids, which you would have seen when you were here. That project was started in late 2010. So that was the year South Africa hosted the Football World Cup. Some people might remember. And yeah, I mean, it was a very small project for a very long time. It grew a little bit over the years. In 2015, we started running the organization on a daily basis. So we got kids to come down 5-6 days a week to come learn surfing, but it was still pretty small. Very small staff, one or two coaches, myself, and one or two other people involved. And then in 2021, I basically just decided that I wanted to change the organization into something that's more Bitcoin related, and I got the idea from Bitcoin Beach to essentially adopt part of their principles and ideas and models, and basically just started paying coaches salaries in Bitcoin and getting the coaches themselves to onboard the shops. And so it basically grew out of the Surfer Kids. So that was almost 5 years ago. It'll be 5 years at the end of this year. So Bitcoin Ekasi launched in November. Well, we started in July 2021, and then started posting stuff on X, or what was Twitter back then, in November. So I guess you could say that the formal anniversary of the project would be November 2026. So that'll be 5 years. 5 years at the end of this year.
Well, it's amazing, actually. I mean, hearing the story, how it started from Sofa Kids. And it's really interesting because that means you actually started the Sofa Kids project a year after Bitcoin was launched. And then it took until 2021 for you to actually, find Bitcoin and then expand the Sofa Kids project to what we call Bitcoin Ekasi today, right? And because of that, I'm kind of like curious to know what was that point where you realized that yes, Bitcoin can actually work hand in hand with the Sofa Kids project, where you kind of like just see Bitcoin and know that this is something that we could use to do more with suffer kids before you even got to realize or maybe hear about Bitcoin Beach, Bitcoin Beach process and try to actually implement that? I believe you must have heard about Bitcoin, right? Before Bitcoin Beach, before it got to the point. So how has the journey been from that point? I mean, when was that point and how has it been from there?
Yeah, I mean, I only really figured out that I could incorporate Bitcoin into the surfer kits after hearing the Bitcoin Beach story. Um, I had
Cool.
ideas before that, but the light bulb moment came when I heard the Bitcoin Beach story. But on a personal level, I'd been obsessed with Bitcoin for a long time before that. I stumbled across a early copy of Bitcoin magazine in 2013, and
Mm.
I remember reading about the banking crisis in Cyprus. Um, and we had some clients. My wife and I used to run a tourism business, and she still operates the tourism business today. I'm not involved anymore, but it's still her business. And
Mm.
back then, we had some clients who had exposure to that banking crisis in Cyprus, where a European country basically confiscated bank deposits to bail out their banking system. And I just happened by coincidence to read Bitcoin Magazine at the same time, and this was in July 2013, and the Cyprus crisis was happening, and I just realized, look, this is obviously a very interesting solution to that problem. And started reading about it, and very slowly but surely started getting into it, and started using Bitcoin in the business in 2015. So we started getting payments from customers um, starting in 2015. So I'd been using Bitcoin for a long time before Bitcoin Ekasi, but I never really saw how I could use Bitcoin in the community project like that. That was not. I didn't connect the dots there. It made a lot of sense for us to use Bitcoin in our business. We worked in tourism. Obviously, international payments was a headache. You would know that, coming from Africa, receiving and sending international payments is a nightmare. South Africa
Yeah.
has very strict controls on that, and so Bitcoin made a lot of sense for me very early on. But when I heard the Bitcoin Beach story, I figured, okay, this is how I could incorporate Bitcoin into the community project. And so, Bitcoin Ekasi gets a lot of attention on X and so on, but really it's the final piece of a puzzle that started many years before that. I don't think the project would have been a success if I had not been obsessed with Bitcoin for such a long time before that, because I also had to go through the whole crypto phase and the shitcoining phase as well.
Yeah.
Between 2015 and 2017, I had a lot of shitcoins. I tried running an Ethereum node on my laptop in 2015. It crashed the machine. I started getting very suspicious of this thing. So there's a lot of things that came before that. Um,
Mm.
but the Bitcoin Beach story was a pivotal moment, because that really showed me how you could leverage a community project, especially a project that has a long history like the Surfer Kids. We had the trust of the community, the teachers, the parents, the school, all the churches in the community. Like they all know who we are, and they know what we do, and we've been doing it for a very long time. So introducing Bitcoin was not an impossible task. The coaches had the trust of the community. Um, so it was not an impossible thing to do. If we had started from scratch, it would have been very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, from the last thing you said, I think that will actually just lead me to my next question. Just out of curiosity, because I know, I mean, before then, first, I think it's really, really interesting. This would be like the very first time I get to learn that the Suffer Kids project started way back in 2010. And then, it was after that that Bitcoin got followed. So, because I had always been thinking, I mean, I knew you for Bitcoin Ekasi first before the whole Suffocates project. But then you said it wasn't really impossible to introduce the people to Bitcoin, the coaches, and also the people that you're basically just working with in Bitcoin Beach. Sorry, the Suffocates. And that actually makes me curious because if you say it wasn't impossible, I know for a fact that there were some challenges, right? I'm just curious to know if there were some form of challenges. Have you ever had a point where you were introducing Bitcoin to them and maybe they start questioning, or maybe you have someone actually trying to revolt or resist using Bitcoin or adopting it fully? What are some of the challenges you kind of like went through while actually building this whole entire project?
I mean, there were loads of challenges, but it was possible because we had the trust of the community. I think if we didn't have that trust, it would have been impossible. But there were many challenges. There still are. You know, it's like we constantly deal with people who hear the word Bitcoin and then they think that we have a lot of money to throw around, because we are very wealthy. You know, we constantly get that.
Yeah.
Even when we deal with people in local government, we constantly get that. We constantly get people who still expect to be scammed when they hear the word Bitcoin. That's an ongoing challenge. So yeah, the challenges are many and multiple. You know, I mean, and it's not such a big challenge to get locals on board anymore because we've now been doing this for a long time, and we have a reputation. You know, even preceding the Bitcoin Ekasi project, we have that reputation. So it's the biggest challenge is not getting locals on board. The biggest challenge is getting people to understand, you know, what it is that you're trying to do and why you're doing it. But it's not that difficult to get them to start accepting Bitcoin or using Bitcoin, but explaining the why is very challenging. And I mean, I actually think that the biggest challenge right now is not getting the locals on board. The biggest challenge right now is to reinvent the project and look at it from a different perspective, because you know we introduced Bitcoin into the local township economy starting 5 years ago. That attracted a lot of attention. You know, but you can't keep doing the same thing over and over again. You gotta innovate and redesign yourself and your project, and you got to do something new to push it forward. And so, a lot of the challenges that we've been dealing with the last 2 years have been trying to find ways to not to grow the project in terms of numbers, but to really grow the impact of the project. So, you know, Bitcoin is a tool for, you know, economic empowerment, but if we ourselves are reliant on outside charity, then are we really practicing what we preach? Are we really teaching people to be economically empowered if we're constantly relying on donations? And so a big part of what we are busy with at the moment, and it's a massive challenge, is to try and really cultivate this mentality of, you know, you gotta build sustainably. You can't build things hoping that you'll be funded with external donations forever. You know, donations will always be useful and always be welcome, and we'll always do fundraising. But ultimately, what we want to do is we want to teach people financial responsibility, and a large part of that is to teach people how to build their own income. You know, most of the attention goes towards Bitcoin Ekasi, but it's because I built my own business in the travel industry that I'm able to do this. You know, I spend most of my time working on Bitcoin Ekasi, but I rely on a successful business to enable me to do that. And so really that's what I should be doing with this project as well. It should be about teaching people to build and grow their own businesses and to teach them how Bitcoin fits into that. So it's not but that's a very difficult thing to do. And the Surfer Kids was always a donation-based charity, and whenever you work with children, especially if you work with children that come from such difficult circumstances, you're always going to be reliant on some form of donation. But it's not necessarily the destination, but it's the trajectory. So are what we're doing, are we pushing ourselves closer towards long-term sustainability, or are we pushing ourselves further away from long-term sustainability? And we're in the process, and we have been in the process for the last 2 years, to basically redesign everything we do around that question. That question is the first and the last question we ask whenever we try and do something new or change something that we're busy with. And that's been hugely challenging, because it means that we've had to rethink the structure of the organization at a very high level, down to all the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts. So that's been a big ongoing challenge.
Thank you very much for that. I think that is a challenge that is common in most places, most projects currently. Sustainability is something that is really, really, really important. But then again, I think based on what you've said now, it has actually kind of like raised my curiosity a little bit, because I know Bitcoin Ekasi for the circular economy part of things, and I also know about the software kits as well too. And I have to say also, personally, I really, really love what you guys are doing. I remember when we visited Mossel Bay last year, I got so emotional when we came to the school at the time. It was really, really emotional hearing the story and how you guys have been able to transform the locality generally, because it's not just the school, right? What are some of those other side projects, that you guys have been working on?
I obviously I can't share everything. We don't have enough time for it. And
Yeah.
there's a couple of things that we're still working on, so don't want to talk too much about it. But I can give you a few examples, definitely.
Okay.
And
That can work.
I'm happy to share those. One of the things that we've been working on is this recycling, upcycling project, where we take old surfboards, that can no longer be repaired, and basically have to be thrown away. You can't recycle a surfboard, and the material that a surfboard is made from is very toxic. If they go into landfills, it's horrible for the environment. It's basically a mix of chemicals that essentially does not disintegrate, and so it's not something that you want to throw away. It's not something that you can recycle. So what can you do with it? So we started making art pieces out of these boards, and we reshaped them into small miniature surfboards that people can hang on their walls, and we decorate them with Bitcoin art.
Oh.
And we've collaborated with a bunch of artists from abroad. And that project has gotten to a point where it's essentially paying for itself. And it employs one person, so it's not huge. We generate one salary through that, and we sell these mini boards at conferences. Well, for the most part, the last 3 years we've been selling these mini boards at Lugano Plan B conference in Switzerland. We'll be going back there later
Yeah, I
this
think
year
I
and
saw one
selling
of
those.
those.
Yeah.
I saw one of those in Lugano, actually.
Yeah. And it's hard because conferences charge a lot of money for booths, and so Lugano is the one conference that has not charged us for that. So we can basically set up there and sell the boards, and we don't have to pay for because it's like an art gallery. It's not really a booth space, and so
Yeah.
that works quite well. We're not able yet to afford going to other conferences where you have to pay thousands of dollars for a booth, but maybe one day. But even so, we basically sell the boards at the Cape Town conference, and we sell them at Lugano, and then we sell the boards to visitors that come through here, and we sell a few of them locally. But even though it's not, sales are not massive, but we've generated enough income to essentially make that little project self-sustainable. And so I think it's almost entirely paid for itself. So that's
Amazing.
that salary does not depend on charity, which is great. And then there's a couple of other things that we're working really hard on. Um, we are we're trying really hard to push the performance levels in our surfing project. And the last 2 years, we've made a lot of progress to get some of these kids to a level where they can surf professionally. Because if we can get them to a level where they're performing at a professional competitive level, then obviously you can start looking at commercial sponsorship agreements. And that's no longer donation based. You know, professional athletes, they have commercial sponsorship agreements where the sponsor comes on board, not for charity, but for marketing exposure. You know, and so if we can use our surfing program to train athletes, surfing athletes that perform at a professional competitive level, then we can potentially generate income through professional sponsorship agreements. And that's a long way away. It's going to be a long time before we get there. But in the last 2 years, we've made more progress towards that goal than ever before. And earlier this year, we had one of our kids finish second in a major competition at a pro junior level, and it's by far the best result we've ever had. It's a very, 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 very difficult result to accomplish.
Yeah.
We've sent kids to compete in. I mean, I'm guessing off the top of my head, we've gone to about 30, maybe 40 events over the last 3 to 4 years, and this is the first time that we've had this breakthrough result. And it's
Wow.
because we've worked really hard to design a coaching program that is targeted. The kids don't just come and have fun. Obviously it's about having fun for most of the kids, but those kids that choose the competitive route, like we don't force any of the kids to compete. We basically run a program where the kids can come and surf for the fun of it. But if there are children that want to compete and say, I put their hand up and say, look, I want to go and surf competitions, then they join a special coaching program within our project. And in that coaching program, the coaching is very, very targeted, because you have to train at a very high level to succeed professionally. And so that's one of the things that we're working on. And that could potentially generate sustainable income long term. There's a couple of other things that we're working on. I mean, we have a local thrift store where we are doing small things like we 3D printing stuff that we can sell, and it's a lot of little small bits and pieces. We have an arcade machine that we're working on. Stuff like that. There's a lot of different ideas that's floating around at the moment, but the two examples I just mentioned are probably the most well-developed ones that we're working on so far.
Reading a story about one of the kids that came up second. It's quite amazing how far you guys have gone. And also talking about impact, I said Bitcoin Ekasi. I was able to actually see the impact myself, to actually kind of like, see it in reality, not just reading them on Twitter or seeing the photos or somewhere. And I was really, really inspired. And at the same time, I was emotional. So I also wanted to ask, are there any of, outside of the kid that came up second, are there any of these impacts that you're actually really, really proud of, like so proud of, that you would want to share? Personally, I'd love to hear the story about the school actually that we visited. I would really love our viewers to also hear this story if you have the time, actually.
I mean, yeah, look, we have a long history with that primary school. It's a little bit of a sad story, because the school is completely government funded, and so the resources are very, very low. It's a very difficult situation for teachers. It's challenging circumstances. Um, Most of the kids that join our surf program are from that school. Um, I think almost all the kids that join our Bitcoin diploma program are from that school. So we have a strong relationship with the school. There's been a very high turnover of staff and principals. So over the last 10, 15 years that we have existed, we've seen like maybe 4 or 5 different school principals come and go. And so it's difficult to build a long-standing relationship when there's such a high turnover in staff. Um, but and there's not much happening at that school. I mean, I think the school has no extracurricular activities, no sport. Basically, the surfing program that we offer is essentially the only thing that the kids can join. So it's a tough situation. It's a very common story across South Africa. There are many, many, many schools who struggle like that. Government resources are very limited, and so typically the government-funded schools don't do very well. At least the schools that are fully government funded. There are many schools that are funded by both the government and privately funded as well. Um, but the school that we work with has no private funding; it is only government funding. So it's a very, very tough situation. Um, and it's amazing to see how proud the school is. Like for example, when we had this result earlier this year, and came back from that event, it's by far one of the most significant sporting um, results that school has had in its entire history. So it's significant to see the impact that it has. Um, and I think most of the teachers at that school, you know, have no idea what surfing is, but it doesn't really matter. All that matters is that they know that somebody won a medal, and it's a medal that was won at a very high profile national event. It's not a small little event. I mean, there were youngsters competing at that event from across the country, and all the best athletes from across the country were at that event. So it's not a regional event. It's not a small local event. It's a national, very high level, very competitive event. And so they don't have to know what surfing is or anything. That's just like, wow, it's a significant result, and it's a major success story for the school, really. So it's an interesting relationship that we've built up with that school. Um, the relationship is not always 100%. Um, how can I say, friendly. There's been many examples where the school has in different ways tried to take advantage of what we do because they struggle, and so they are underfunded. And so you have to be careful that the school
Yes.
also doesn't take advantage of the fact that they see you as a potential source of funding, which is inappropriate. We are not there to fund the school. We are there to run a project that benefits the school, but we can't start giving direct funding to the school. And so one has to be careful with that. Things like that. So it's a very complex relationship to manage. Um, and it's made even more complex by the fact that there are many kids who are participating in our project or in our program, in one of our programs, that struggle at school. They really struggle. And you have to figure out, like, you can't try and replace the school, but you also have to figure out a way for these kids to not abandon school completely. um so that's tricky. It's difficult to manage. So it's a very interesting dynamic that most people don't think about.
Amazing. So I'd say thank you very much for that. But then I think we will be rounding up very soon. I just wanted to ask, because I mean, we've been talking about the project and the work you've been doing from the beginning, right? I'm just curious to know about you personally, right? Outside of the project, outside of Bitcoin generally, What are some of the hobbies you have? Are there any other interests you have? I mean, you the one that has to do with your travel business that you started a long time ago. But outside of those two, are there any other, like something that people don't really know about you that you would probably want to share with us?
Um, yeah, I mean, look, um, I'm married. I have two kids. That takes up a hell of a lot of time. So, our kids are
Mm,
6 and 9, and so it's a very active age. Um, they run around. They are naughty. They're constantly causing shit. So that takes up a lot of your time as a parent. So being a parent is a large part of what takes up my time. Um, and then I do still get involved with the travel business from time to time. Other than that, I mean, I live in a quiet little town. Mossel Bay is not a very big city. There's some pros and cons to that. There's not a lot of exciting things happening
yeah,
here, but then again, I like to go surfing, and surfing is the kind of thing that you want less people, not more, because the waves in the ocean are limited. It's a limited resource, and so the more people you have to share it with, the less you have for yourself, and you can't make more of it. Like you're basically relying on Mother Nature to provide the waves, and so the
yeah,
resource is limited, and very how can I say it doesn't come every day, and so I appreciate living in a small town where I can go surfing and as often as I can, which is not often enough. Um, Other than that, I enjoy the ocean. I enjoy nature. I like being on the beach. My wife and I always joke that the only time that our kids feel normal is when they're at the beach, because that's when they can not really cause
I can
serious
imagine.
damage. Like anywhere else, it feels like they're about to tear the place down. And so going to the going, going to the beach is yeah is I really enjoy traveling, and so I don't go to too many conferences. The first 2 years after Bitcoin Ekasi started, I went to a shitload of
Mm,
conferences, and that was too much. And so I try and do like maybe 2 or 3 conferences a year now. But when I do go, I enjoy it. My wife also enjoys traveling, but it's been difficult with the kids. We're actually going. We were going to go to the Prague
wow.
conference together, which is coming up next week. But unfortunately, her visa got rejected, and
Mm,
so she's not able to go. But we're gonna travel together anyway. So she'll be going to Istanbul with me. We'll have a stopover in Istanbul, and then
okay.
she'll meet a friend in Istanbul while I go to Prague, and then we'll come back, spend some time in Istanbul, and then fly back to South Africa. So you know, yeah, I really enjoyed traveling. I met my wife while traveling, and I used to travel a lot when I was a kid. Um, I spent a lot of time outside South Africa studying and going to school abroad, and then came back to South Africa when I was 20 24. Met my wife abroad as well. I was born and raised there, and my family's been here for a very long time. But I think traveling has been one of the um, most important educational tools that I've had in my life. I don't think I would have been able to do the things that I do if it wasn't for my traveling experience.
Yeah,
It really opens your mind to what's out there, and gives you a much bigger
yeah.
perspective.
It makes sense actually. I love traveling, and like you said, I mean, traveling opens you up to a lot of things. I mean, seeing a lot of learning that you normally wouldn't get in your own country. I am not married, but I hear I hear marriage is a full-time job itself. So I can imagine actually. I'm looking forward to it. Very soon, hopefully. And then finally, before we go, I'd like you to maybe just share one piece of advice for you'd like to give to African founders that are actually building in Bitcoin today? Because I know there's a lot of, every day you get to see a lot of new projects, you get to see a lot of founders starting one thing or the other. But sometimes also there are situations where you see these founders start something and 6 months, 1 year into it, it's nowhere to be found, right? So, if you could give one piece of advice to founders in Bitcoin, generally new founders, what would that be?
Um, yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound discouraging, but um, the advice I would give is to say that it's always going to take much longer than you think it's going to take. Um, if your if your horizon if your horizon for your project in your mind when you start is 5 years, then it's probably going to take 10 years, or maybe more. If your horizon for your project is a year or two, then probably it's going to take 5 or 6 years. Um, things take longer than what we imagine them to take, in my experience, um, and things don't always scale the way we imagine they will, and sometimes, more often than not, you don't get to do things exactly the way you planned them to. You have to adjust, and you have to be willing to adjust, and oftentimes the best part of the project is not necessarily the part of the project that you planned for. You know, I did not plan to start a Bitcoin project when I started the Surfer Kids. I planned to start a surfing project, and the Bitcoin project came out of the surfing project.
Yeah.
Um, but to a very large extent, that's the best part of the project today. So, you know, it's unpredictable, and you kind of got to go with what life gives you, and accept that, you know, it's gonna, you have to be prepared to make sacrifices. You know, you have to be prepared to compromise. Like, you're not gonna have everything the way you want it. Um, you know, I sometimes think to myself that I would have loved to live in a big city where things are more exciting, and there's, you know, lots of rock concerts, and I can go and watch my favorite bands play every weekend. And but if I lived in a big city, then I probably wouldn't
Yes.
be able to have this project, because this project works much better in a small town. And so, which one of the two am I going to prioritize? And I think a big mistake that people often make is that they think
Yeah.
people want to believe that they can have their cake and eat it, and that's just not how it works. Like, you compromise and make your decisions based on what your priorities are, but to imagine that you can have everything exactly the way you want it, it's just not realistic. And so I often see people make that mistake. I mean, I've seen projects fail because people think that they can start one project in one place but then spend most of their time somewhere else, and think that this project is going to be successful even though they're not there on the ground to manage and guide it. You know, that's happened in the past. Um, you know, I've seen examples like that happen in the past before. You know, I've seen people give up on projects because they had an idea and it didn't turn out exactly the way they wanted to. And there was another opportunity that they could have pivoted the project in another direction. It could have been really exciting, but then they just, you know, give up because it didn't happen exactly the way they wanted it to. So I think you have to be willing to adjust, and you know, it takes time, and that's the biggest mistake that people make. And I think social media plays a big part in that, because we have this amazing tool. You know, you can talk to a massive audience, and that's never been possible before. Like, before social media, before the internet, talking to an audience of thousands of people was reserved for an elite club of people, and these days anyone can do that. But now what happens is, you know, because everybody is trying to do that, the attention span of people have gone down. And so, you know, you don't find people sitting reading the Sunday newspaper for a whole afternoon. You know, they scroll through TikTok, then they scroll through Instagram, then they scroll through X, then they scroll. and with that, the information gets compressed into smaller and smaller packets, and you have to convey your message in 10 seconds, otherwise nobody's listening to you. And with that, there's this misconception, for example, that Bitcoin Ekasi has become so successful and it just happened overnight, and people miss the bigger story of, no, there's a fuckload of work that went into this long before Bitcoin Ekasi even started. And I think that's just the basic reality of life, and it's good to be reminded of that.
Cool. And thank you so much, Hermann, for joining us. It's been a great time. Hopefully we get to have you here again some other time. But before you go, where can people easily find you if they want to reach you, actually?
You can always reach out via X, at Bitcoin Ekasi. That's probably the easiest, best place to go. Otherwise, our website, bitcoinekasi.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Hermann. Thank you for the time, and I hope you have a lovely day. Awesome.
Cool, man. Thank you, dude. Likewise, appreciate it.